What's up, everyone? Today we are painting Berin from Simon's Zombicide Green Horde. He is the dwarf that is in mostly pastel colors, and I think he came out really awesome. I've been having a great time painting up the core set, and with him now all the heroes of the core set are done, and I can move on to the heroes of the Horde box, the Kickstarter exclusives. And then also, I only have the regular orcs left to do, and we are completely done with the entire core box, which is pretty awesome. But let's get down to the table, and I'll show you how I did them. Alright, so settle in. We're in for a long one with this one. I started Berin off with a black primer and then a white primer from the top and a 45-degree angle to give a zenithal highlight. We're starting with the natural flesh from Nocturna, and I'm painting all of his skin. Thankfully, there's only his face that needs to be painted. He's completely covered everywhere else. After ensuring a couple layers of good coverage, I'm now going to the natural flesh a little bit brighter, and I'm covering his nose, his cheeks, and a little bit on his forehead. We don't want to go too deep on his forehead though, because that's in the wolf pelt's mouth. So we want it to be just where the light would hit. Using some Vallejo model color ivory, and I'm using that for his eyes. Now you want to do the eyes as early as possible. I'm starting to favor doing them before even starting the skin of the model, because that allows you to then use the skin to shape the eyes. But I only put one layer of highlight on, so I can easily just repaint on the base coat and fix that up. I'm using flat brown, clear orange, and flat red, all from Vallejo model color here. And I'm starting with just the flat brown. And the flat brown is going to be on his beard. And he doesn't really have any distinction between his hair and his beard on this model, because it's covered in the wolf pelt. So anything that doesn't look like wolf but does look like fur, paint it with this brown color and get a real solid base coat on there. After that, I started mixing in a little bit of the red and orange and started doing the highlights, picking out mostly the top areas and trying to stay out of any of the deep cracks, but trying to get as much coverage as I could. You want to start off the highlights pretty slow. The more highlights that you put on, here you can see I'm at pretty much the end phase of this, of mostly orange and red, and just a little bit of brown kind of to tie it all together. I'm kind of at the end phase of all of this. The more orange you put on at this end phase, the oranger he's going to look. His hair is going to look. So you can vary it and get a kind of a different look depending on that. So this is going to be for the pelt. I'm using black and ivory from Vallejo model color. I'm using Mechanicus standard gray from GW, and I'm using wolf gray from Vallejo game color. And if you saw my necromancer video, I'm going to use the same technique for painting the fur of the wolf. The first thing I'm going to do is take the darkest color, which in this case is just pure black, and paint from pretty much the base of the wolf's skull all the way down towards his tail in a V pattern. So I don't want it to be too wide. You want this to be pretty much the smallest distinct area. And then I'm coming in with the next color, which is Mechanicus standard gray. Now luckily, if you're painting in black fur, you actually can be a little stark with the transitions here. And while the paint is still wet, I then go in, wet my brush, well, clean my brush off completely. You can also use a second brush, which is what a lot of painters do, or clean your brush off, just get a little tiny bit of water on it, and then you're going to blur the line between the two. So you're not really wet blending to get a really good transition. You kind of want it to be scraggly and rough to look like fur, but you do want to blur the line between the two of them. You don't want to see the black just cut off like as if it was a Dalmatian spot, because that's not natural fur. That comes from, you know, human intervention. So with a wolf or a bear or something like that, they need to have really like muddied lines between the colors of the fur. Now I've just gone with the wolf gray towards the outside and then the ivory at the very edges and did exactly the same thing, blended between each stage of color. And this is pretty much what you're left with. It already looks good, but we're going to do a couple more steps to really make it pop. But before we go, I wanted it to dry completely, so it needs to be very, very dry. I'm using P3's Umbral Umber. That's that real chocolatey brown, real dark brown. If you're going to paint something brown and you want to lighten it, this is a great color to start with, rather than mixing black in there and getting it kind of chalky. This one is looks like pure cocoa. So now the wolf pelt is dry, and I'm taking the Nuln oil, and I've added water to the Nuln oil. Don't use a matte medium or anything like that. Use water for this, and there's a reason. The water will thin down the pigment and make sure that pigment doesn't actually get on the raised portions. It only gets down into the cracks. And I pretty much did a 50-50 of water and Nuln oil, and I just did 2 or 3 coats. Here's all the mixtures that I had from actually painting the fur. So the first one was black and Mechanica Standard Gray, and then the second one was Mechanica Standard Gray and Wolf Gray. And in the center, I'm using the black Mechanica Standard Gray mixture and very lightly dry brushing. Again, the Nuln oil has to be completely dry before you do this. You don't want the paint to start to run and smear everything all over the place. And then along the edges, I'm doing the Wolf Gray, Mechanica Standard Gray there. So this is giving even more dimension to the fur and making this fur really pop and really look lifelike. You'll see when I bring it closer to the camera after it's done here, it looks like real fur, especially, well, real fur on a guy this tiny. So as real as it's gonna get, I guess. So you can see there, that really just looks exactly like what, if you have a dog, look at their fur, that's what it looks like. Now we have that Umbral Umber and Flat Brown from Vallejo. Umbral Umber's from P3. And now I'm finishing up his cape. I guess it's a cape. It's not really a cloak because it just hangs off the back of him. But Flat Brown is going to be the main color, but I don't want it to be super bright. If you look at the character art for Berin, the cape is very dark in tone. So I started with about a 50-50 mixture of the Umbral Umber and Flat Brown, painted all of the flat areas and raised areas. Anything that was a dip or anything that was like a crack or crevice, that's where I left the pure Umbral Umber to be the shadow color. And then I'm moving towards more Flat Brown each time, and pure Flat Brown is the actual highlight. So I don't go any lighter than that because the cloak or the cape looks really dark in pictures. So I wanted to recreate that. So there you can see his cape and how well it mixes with the light fur. I think if you want to do it, you know, a little differently and you do dark fur, then do a light cape, even a very light brown cape. So we're adding now khaki and ivory to the same mixture that we had before, and this is going to be for the leather vest and armor that he's wearing. So the first thing that I'm doing is taking pure Umbral Umber and painting the whole entire thing as a base coat. Again, like I said, anytime you're painting brown, Umbral Umber works as a great shadow color. And we're going to use a wash later on, but the wash is actually going to change the color of this leather, and we don't want it to have to be a shadow, because we actually want the color of it to pop. What I'm doing here is I'm taking the pure flat brown, so this is not a mixture, pure flat brown, and running it along all the rivets that are in the armor, one row at a time. So I just went one row, and then I took a second brush. I got a little bit of water on it, and I'm feathering out that color so that the color fades. This is not a wet blend of any kind. The Umbral Umber is already completely dry. The flat brown, I'm just feathering the sides of it so that it blends into the dark brown without having such a stark like a stark line to it where it looks like it was painted on, because the two colors are very different. It's kind of hard to see on camera with bright lights pointing down at him, but in person you'll definitely be able to see it. So again, I'm doing that over every line of these rivets that are in his armor. So every single one, even the ones that are down around his waist, I do the same thing. And then what I come back and do is I take the khaki, and this is pure khaki, and I paint this the exact same way. Now you might be saying, well, you just did all that work with the brown, why would you do this? Again, this is a trick of the light. The light that is pointing at them, at the model while I'm painting, I need a really bright light, so I'm using these bright LEDs. The problem with that is it's not what you see naturally in front of you, so I want him to look good on the board in front of me. Well, you can clearly see these different varying layers of brown through the khaki. So I'm not painting on multiple layers. And you saw I did the exact same thing, I feathered it again. Now, I lost the footage, but I took ivory, mixed that with khaki, and then I started doing line highlights, and that's what you see down there at the bottom. So follow the same thing, you already know what to do. All of the raised portions, you want to paint with that khaki and ivory mixture. Just a little bit on his belly, but a lot down at the base of his skirt. Then I took Carisburg Crimson, which is red, and Agrax Earthshade, which is brown. Mixed them together 50-50, no water on this one, and I painted this across the leather. So that little bit of red and that little bit of brown like mixed together on this really made that leather look super realistic. Now do not forget, on his arms and up around his chest is a little bit more of that leather, so you have to do it for everything, and it's all kind of the same color even though it's a different design. Now this is Vallejo's model color black, and I'm now painting all of those rivets. Again, let the wash dry completely before you start this, or you're going to end up with a big mess. But do all the rivets all across his armor. The other thing that I didn't show painting was his boots, and also his the nose of the wolf. I painted the nose of the wolf and the pads of the wolf's paws in black. I painted them at one point in pink, and it looked really silly. They looked like cat's paws, so I went back and painted that in black. So the wolf's paws, the pads of his paws, I painted black. The handle to the axe, his shoes, and all the little rivets on his armor. Then I went and took the wolf gray, and the wolf gray I'm doing even smaller, even finer on each of these rivets to give it sort of a metallic highlight on there without being actually metallic. So we don't want them to look shiny and bright because his armor is clearly used. He's clearly a warrior. So we want them to just sort of have a glisten as if they were metallic. And then now we're going to take ivory and do the exact same thing that we did, but with an even finer brush, and we're just going to put a little tiny point on each one of the rivets, skipping the one that is in his belly and the very top line of the skirt. Those ones you do not want to put a super highlight on, because light would barely even be touching those. So the gray is enough for those. Especially now that you have a white to show how bright it could be. Now we're using purple, squid pink, and ivory, all from Vallejo. Squid pink is the game color line. And this part I'm going to jump back and forth, but it's because the way I was mixing it, I sort of jumped back and forth. So right here, this is a 50-50 mixture of squid pink and and purple. So I painted the scrunchies in his beard squid pink and purple. Then his gloves I painted in just pure purple. And the reason why I mixed first was I knew I wanted the scrunchies in his beard to be that color, but I wasn't sure what color I wanted the gloves to be. So the gloves are now pure flat purple, and I am going to take Agrax Earthshade and paint those over the gloves because I wanted to darken them down, and give them sort of this brown, gritty hue to them, kind of as if they were just painted leather. The knees, well, his pants, I guess, but the only thing you can see of his pants is his knees. I also painted those in the same purple color and did the same thing, put the Agrax Earthshade on those. So make sure you turn the model around because he does have the gloves on the other side that you can see, so you want to make sure that you get to those as well. Then this is pure squid pink, so this is just pink, and he has these ruffles that are right underneath. They basically connect the glove and the shoulder pads. Now there's a little bit of brown leather right above the right hand, but there isn't one above the left hand, so you'll see that they pretty much connect on the left arm, but they don't on the right arm. So I did the squid pink there. And then now what I've done is I went back and added some ivory to the purple. So this is there's no pink in this at all. It's just purple and some ivory. And I did about 3 or 4 highlights of this. So I went back and did, just a little tiny bit of ivory, then a little bit more, and at max I think I did 25% ivory, 75% purple. I didn't want it to get too bright. And I also did this on the knees as well. Then I added the ivory to the squid pink and purple mixture, and I started highlighting the scrunchies that are in his beard. So if you can imagine, I should have showed my palette, you'd understand why I was doing it this way. I had the purple and the pink, and then I combined them in the center, and then I took ivory and combined them to each one of those pools. And that's why I was jumping around so much, is I kept trying to test the color, because in the picture it's hard to tell how different they are from each other. This is now just pink and pure pink and white, or ivory I mean. And I went and I did about 3 or 4 highlights to this. So I'm only showing one layer of highlights. So I mean, it's going to look exactly the same, but you'll see when the model is, when I put the model down, how much brighter each one of these areas are, because I continuously went back and kept fixing it and getting it brighter and brighter and brighter. So now you can see there's actual highlights all around his scrunchies, his arms, his knees. Now we're using refractive green and light turquoise, and I'm trying for the first time some Vallejo's metal medium. So I mixed them together until I got a color that I was happy with, which is sort of this jade color. And you'll see it's kind of metallic. Now I'm doing sort of a true metallic metal, a TMM technique, but I'm not going to bill this video as doing TMM because it ended up being exactly the same as how I normally just paint things. You'll see what I mean in a second, but when I highlight, I don't use the washes and then highlight with more metallics the way that you do with a true metallic metal, and I really want to try that soon, but because his metallics were so scattered and all so small, and I really wanted him to come out awesome, and I didn't want to mess up, I figured I'll practice on a different model. So now I'm taking Wolf Gray, and I'm mixing the Wolf Gray into the 50-50 mixture of turquoise and dark green. So I used 50-50 to get turquoise, to get the Jade color, and then I started adding gray to lighten it up. I didn't want to use white because I thought it would brighten too quickly. I thought that the gray would keep it in the metallic tones. So that metallic mixture is still in there. It is really awesome. It's very cool to just turn any color into a metallic. It's pretty neat how that works. But here you can see I just started highlighting. Basically, I took the model, looked at it from the top, and anything that I could see was the part that I highlighted. And then from there, I took the center of that and highlighted it a little more each time. So that's what I was saying. This is sort of the same way we all paint every other thing, is to put down a base coat and then highlight up. The only difference is that you want to make sure that you do a line highlight every single time, getting smaller and smaller and smaller to a point on the edge of the metal. So you'll see me do that again. So right there, I'm doing I'm making a small triangle, and then I go back and I do a line highlight across that as well. You want to always make sure that your edge is brighter than the metal itself. That's what really makes it pop as being metallic. It's sort of a cheat kind of way. You need to put more work into it than that, but it's a nice little cheat way to do it. And then I went back and put in a little bit of ivory into the mixture just to get a really bright piece, and just put a little tiny dab on it, and went and highlighted the edges of the shoulder plates. So you can see there, now it actually looks quite bright. And I went back and it was a little bit too bright in person, so I went back and just dulled it just a little bit extra green in there, and covered it up. But now you can see it looks like he's wearing metallic metal that is jade colored. Back to our two favorite colors for this model, Umbral Umber and Flat Brown. And I'm taking the Umbral Umber and painting all of the hammer in his left hand. Well, not all of the hammer, the hammer head. Next, I'm taking the Flat Brown, and while the Umbral Umber is drying on the other side, I am painting in the goat head and the mast, the little part that's holding on the goat head of the emerald axe that he's holding in his right hand. I think it's called the dwarven axe in the game, but it has an emerald stone as the blade head. Then I'm going to take that same Flat Brown, and that's what I'm going to use to highlight the hammer in his left hand. Here's the two actual metallic metals that I'm using, copper from Games Workshop and gold from Vallejo's Model Color. And I'm using the copper on the hammer, so it has this metal piece that wraps around it all the way around the head, and I am painting it in that color. It matches pretty much the best, and the dark brown is a really good base coat for it. Now the gold is going to take 2 or 3 coats, probably 3 if you want really shiny gold. 2 coats was pretty good at still having a little bit of that brown background to it, but gold does not cover well, especially bright gold. So now we have wolf gray buff and ivory white. We're going to do a couple different things with this. First, the wolf gray is going to be the spikes on the hammer. It's going to be the little piece that's holding the head of the hammer onto the handle, and then there's also a small like orb at the bottom that is just looks like it's just a metal orb that needs to be painted as well. Then I'm taking a little bit of the buff and putting that on top of it. Mixed in with the gray. Sorry, the buff mixed in with the gray. Don't put buff by itself. That'll look really weird because that'll be sort of brownish colored. And then finally, I'm adding a little bit of ivory mixed into that mixture on there as well. And then I took the buff and went and did his shoelaces. So the shoelaces was the first thing that I did. And I don't think you can see them on there. But another important part with the buff is if you can get a really fine paintbrush, he has wrapping all along the handle. So buff makes a great color to do the wrapping on the handle. And I just did pretty much a crisscross pattern all the way up and down. And then I mixed some ivory into the buff, so this doesn't have any gray in it. Some ivory into the buff and went just on the top and went right over my crisscross patterns on the top there to highlight those and make the top look a little lighter than the bottom. So now these are all the colors that we are going to be using for the axe. We have the dark green, we have flat green, worm green, yellow, and white. So the first thing you want to do is coat the entire blade and the spike at the top and the back. Make sure you coat both sides, all with the very dark green, the refractive green. Now we're going to want to make a gradient. So you're going to take that refractive green and mix it with the flat green in varying degrees. And the next color that you get, so a little mixture of the two of them, you're going to paint only about 80% of the blade. And the same thing for the spikes. And do that on both sides. Now on the, I think I just skipped forward here. You're going to keep doing that. Do like the next one is 70%, then 80%, or 50, sorry, other way around, 70, then 60, then 50. The more colors you put on, so the more steps before you get down to this brightest color, the better it will look. So this is some worm green mixed into the flat green. And I'm painting probably the bottom 30% and then also all along the blade. And then just the tip of both of the spikes, and I'm doing that on both sides. And that is the last color you want to do for that. Now I'm letting that dry completely because I now have to paint over it and I don't want it to smear. But I'm taking whole red, which is a dark brown with like a red base in it, and I'm painting the handle of this axe. And then I'm going to go back with my thin brush and paint the red on the top. So this is going to be a diagonal. I'm not doing crisscross marks. This one just looks like it's a wrap. So you want them to be spread out just enough so you see some brown in between. And I'm doing the diagonal from the left to the right. So top left to bottom right. And doing that all the way around. Now if you want to highlight this, you could add a little orange to the red and highlight it again, but it's not incredibly important. But I did take the opportunity to put red in the eyes of the wolf as well. Alright, and now to finalize the blade, what I've done is I've now mixed some of the light yellow into the worm green. So it's getting very, very bright, and I'm starting to draw little lines all across the blade. And you want them to be as thin as possible, and you want them to be always going in the same direction. Now they can cut across, but they should always be moving from the head of the goat to the head of the goat to the blade portion. Then you also want to highlight the some lines in the spikes as well, so it all looks like the same sort of rock. Then those little lines that I did, I went back with pretty much the pure yellow and did the exact same thing right over the same lines but a little further down. So I left the ones that are closest to the ram skull alone. And then my final highlight was to take pure white and just go into right in between the mix where any of the lines that I had made met, and put a little bit of white in there. Now this does make it really, really bright, and I'll share a tip in a second. I just want to see if there's any more that I did on this. Okay, so here is the final white, and this was a little bit too bright for me. What I ended up doing was taking Beeltan Green Shade, which is a GW green shade, and thinned it down a ton, used a bunch of water, let this dry completely, then used water, thinned down that green shade, and painted it over it to take those whites and yellows and bring them into a greenish hue. And I think that wrapped it up perfectly, but I did it after I was done filming and everything like that, so it's not caught on here. But I do think that is definitely worth it. Like, follow the exact same process, but then take a green shade and go over it with very light green shade. Don't use it right out of the pot. So here's an optional step, but I do think it's worth it. I took some flat flesh and some of that pink, mixed it together to get a really light fleshy color, and painted the inside of the wolf's mouth. I think that you know, kind of wraps it up, because it was, you know, this weird black with kind of, you know, paint strokes in there, so it definitely needed to be covered. But I think that the skin color looks better than if I had painted it black. Then I took the ivory and painted the wolf's teeth, and that pretty much wraps it up. I based him in the exact same way that I based all my other models, so you can watch any of the other videos in the line from the earlier ones, and I show how to base. You can see there that the axe is you know, looks in a really good green tone. The other thing that I did was, after spraying the entire thing in a dull coat, I went back with a hard coat, which is a glossy coat, and glossed over the axe and the armor to make it shiny. And there he is in front of his character art. I think he came out great. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now that you know that we're all done with all these guys, what do you want to see next? Let me know. I'll get it painted, and I'll see you all next time.